The massive doors of the Coalition starship Meridian slid open with a soft hiss. Katie Miller stepped through, her small boots making quiet sounds on the metal floor. She stood just over 5 feet tall and weighed barely more than 100 pounds. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her green eyes looked around the huge hallway with wonder. The ship was enormous. The ceiling stretched high above her head, designed for beings much larger than humans. Alien crew members walked past her, some standing nearly twice her height. Their armor clanked, and their claws clicked on the floor as they moved. Katie had to step aside several times to avoid being knocked over by the massive forms. She carried a single bag over her shoulder and held a datapad in her small hands. The orders on the screen were simple. Report to Tactical Response Unit 7. For assignment. Katie had trained for this moment for 2 years, but now that she was here, she felt very small indeed. A helpful robot guide led her through the winding corridors. The ship was like a floating city, with different sections for different species. Katie passed through areas where the air glowed purple for the Zephyrians, and sections where the floor was covered in sand for the desert dwellers. Everything was built for beings larger and stronger than humans. The Tactical Response Unit's quarters were located in the military section of the ship. The doors here were thicker, and armed guards stood at key points. Katie's guide stopped at a heavy door, marked with symbols she could not read. The robot's voice was flat and mechanical as it spoke. Tactical Response Unit 7. Report to Captain. SciFi immediately. Katie thanked the robot and pressed her hand to the door scanner. The massive portal opened to reveal a room that took her breath away. The ceiling was at least 20 feet high, and the walls were covered with weapons from dozens of different worlds. Training equipment filled one corner, including obstacles that looked impossible for a human to navigate. But it was the beings in the room that made Katie's heart race. 4 alien warriors turned to look at her, and she had never felt smaller. In her life, Captain Sci-Fi stood in the center of the room. He was of Rex, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with natural armor covering his body. His 6 arms ended in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. His 4 eyes fixed on Katie with what looked like disappointment. "You must be the human," he said, his voice deep and rumbling. "I was expecting someone larger." Next. To him stood Tholmer, a Gorvani warrior who looked like he was carved from stone. His gray skin was covered in battle scars, and his massive hands could probably crush Katie's head like an egg. He crossed his arms and shook his head slowly. "This is what the humans send us?" Tholmer asked. "A child? She looks like she would break if I breathed on her too hard." The third member of the team was Velsik, a Sithran scout. His snake-like body was covered in green scales that shifted color as he moved. His yellow eyes studied Katie with the cold intelligence of a predator. When he spoke, his forked tongue flicked out between his words. "She is small, even for a human," Velsik said. "How can such a tiny creature be useful in combat?" The last team member was Quantol, a Zephyrian technician. His crystalline body caught the light and threw rainbow patterns on the walls. He was the most polite of the group, but even he seemed doubtful. "Perhaps there has been a mistake," Quantol said, in his musical voice. "Surely the humans have larger warriors they could send." Katie stood in the center of the room, feeling the weight of their stares. She had expected this reaction. Humans were new to the Coalition, and most alien species still did not understand them. She kept her voice steady as she spoke. "I am Katie Miller, reporting for duty, sir." She handed her orders to Captain Eskafek. "I have completed all required training and am ready for assignment." The captain took the datapad with one of his clawed hands. He read through her file quickly, his expression growing more confused with each line. "Your scores are impressive," he admitted. But numbers on a screen do not make a warrior. Tell me, Katie Miller, what makes you think you can keep up with this unit? Katie had practiced this moment many times. She looked up at the towering alien and spoke with quiet confidence. I may be small, sir, but I am here to do my job. I will not slow down the team. Thelmer laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Your job? Little human, do you even know what we do here? We are sent to the most dangerous places in the galaxy. We fight enemies that would use you as a toothpick. I understand the risks. Katie replied, I volunteer for this assignment. Valsec slithered closer, his movements smooth and silent. You volunteer? Do you humans have no sense of self-preservation? You should be asking to go home to your safe little world. Katie did not back down, even though the alien's presence made her skin crawl. Earth is my home, but this is my duty. I will serve wherever the Coalition needs me. Captain Zixafik made a decision. Very well. You will join the unit, but you will start with support duties. Equipment maintenance, communications, basic tasks. We cannot risk you in actual combat. The other team members exchanged looks. They clearly thought even support duties were too dangerous for the small human. Katie noticed their expressions, but said nothing. She had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words. Show her to her quarters, the captain ordered Quental, and find her some equipment that fits. Everything here is too large for her. As Quental led Katie from the room, she heard the others talking behind her. The humans must be desperate, Thulner said, sending younglings to fight their battles. Perhaps it is a test, Valsec suggested, to see if we will accept their weakest members. Or maybe they simply have no one else to send, the captain replied. Either way, we will make the best of it. Katie's quarters were small but comfortable. The bed was too large for her, and the desk was too high, but she had expected this. She unpacked her few belongings and placed them carefully around the room. A picture of her family went on the desk, and her personal weapons went in the secure locker dot as she organized her gear. Katie thought about her new teammates. They saw only her size and assumed she was weak. This was not unusual. Most species in the galaxy were larger and stronger than humans. What they did not understand was that size and strength were not the only ways to be dangerous. Katie had grown up on a world where humans were not the strongest or fastest creatures, but they had survived and thrived because they were smart, adaptable, and patient. They could work together, solve problems, and wait for the right moment to strike. These were the skills that had made humans successful, not raw physical power. The ship's intercom crackled to life. All personnel prepare. For departure. We will be leaving dock in 1 hour. Katie finished unpacking and checked her equipment one more time. Her weapons were smaller than those carried by her teammates, but they were deadly in the right hands. Her armor was lighter but more flexible. Everything about her gear was designed for speed and stealth rather than direct confrontation. She looked at herself in the mirror. The alien uniforms had been modified to fit her small frame, but she still looked tiny compared to the massive beings she had seen in the corridors. Most would see her as harmless, maybe even cute. This was exactly what she wanted. Katie had learned long ago that being underestimated was a weapon in itself. When enemies expected a large, obvious threat, they often missed the small, quiet danger that slipped past their defenses. She had trained for years to use her size as an advantage, and now she would have the chance to prove herself. The ship began to move, and Katie felt the slight vibration through the floor. Somewhere in the galaxy, there was a mission waiting. For Tactical Response Unit 7. Her teammates thought she would be a burden, but Katie knew better. She was exactly what the unit needed, even if they could not see it yet. She smiled to herself as she prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. They said the human girl was too small, but they had no idea what was hiding behind her quiet exterior. 3 days later, the Meridian dropped out of hyperspace near a rocky planet called Kepler 442b. Katie stood in the briefing room with her teammates, studying the holographic display that showed the mining world spinning slowly in the center of the room. The planet looked harsh and uninviting, with deep canyons and jagged mountains covering its surface. Captain Eskathak pointed to a spot on the planet with one of his clawed hands. The situation is critical. Separatist forces have taken control of the main mining facility. They are holding 30 civilian workers hostage in the underground levels. The hologram zoomed in to show the mining complex. It was built into the side of a mountain, with tunnels that went deep into the rock. The facility looked like a maze of narrow passages and large chambers, all carved from solid stone. The Separatists are led by Commander Jackster and his Torgan. Rebels, the captain continued. They have superior weapons and know the facility better than we do. Local security forces tried to retake the mines, but were forced to retreat. Tholmer studied the display with interest. How many enemies are we facing? Intelligence reports suggest 40 to 50 armed fighters, Zixothic replied. They have positioned themselves in the deepest parts of the facility, using the hostages as shields. Velsek's scales changed from green to a darker color as he considered the tactical situation. The tunnels are narrow and winding. It will be difficult to mount a direct assault without risking the hostages. That is why we are here, the captain said. Command wants the hostages rescued alive. A full military assault would likely result in civilian casualties. Katie had been listening quietly, but now she stepped forward to get a better look at the hologram. The facility's layout was complex, with multiple levels connected by maintenance shafts and service tunnels. Most of these passages were too small for the larger alien species to navigate. What about these smaller tunnels? She asked, pointing to thin lines on the display that connected different areas of the facility. Quintal's crystalline form shifted as he accessed the facility's blueprints. Those are maintenance and ventilation shafts. They were designed for automated repair drones, not living beings. How big are they? Katie asked. Approximately 1 meter high and 60 centimeters wide. Quintal replied, far too small for any of us to use. Katie studied the tunnel system more carefully. The passages connected nearly every part of the facility, creating a hidden network that bypassed the main corridors. Someone small enough could potentially move through the entire complex without being detected. I could fit through those tunnels, she said. The room fell silent. Her teammates stared at her as if she had suggested something impossible. Absolutely not, Captain Zixothic said firmly. Those tunnels are dangerous. You could get lost, trapped, or killed. We need another solution. But I am the only one small enough to use them, Katie pointed out. I could gather intelligence, find the hostages, maybe even help with the rescue. Thulmer shook his massive head. Little human, you do not understand. This is not a game. The Separatists are trained killers. They will shoot first and ask questions later. I understand the risks, Katie said calmly. But the tunnels could give us a major advantage. I could scout ahead and report what I find. Valsek's forked tongue flicked out as he considered the idea. It is true that intelligence gathering is crucial for this mission, but sending our smallest member into such danger seems unwise. What if something goes wrong? Quintal asked. You would be alone down there with no backup. Katie had expected their concern, but she also knew that her size was not the weakness they thought it was. She had trained for exactly this kind of situation, learning to move through tight spaces and gather information without being detected. I have experience with reconnaissance, she said. I know how to stay hidden and avoid detection. This is what I was trained for. The captain looked at the hologram again, weighing the options. The mission was dangerous, no matter what approach they took. A direct assault would likely result in heavy casualties on both sides. But sending Katie into the tunnels alone seemed like sending her to her death. "I will consider it," he said finally. "But first, we need to land and assess the situation." In person, the team gathered their gear and prepared for deployment. Katie checked her equipment carefully, making sure everything was secure and ready for use. Her weapons were smaller than those carried by her teammates, but they were perfectly suited for close quarters combat in confined spaces. As they boarded the shuttle for the trip to the planet's surface, Katie noticed how her teammates looked. At her, there was concern in their eyes and something else she had not seen before. They were starting to see her as more than just a burden, but they still did not understand what she was truly capable of. The shuttle landed at a safe distance from the mining facility. The planet's surface was harsh and rocky, with thin air that made breathing difficult. Katie's smaller lung capacity actually helped her here, as she adapted to the altitude faster than her larger teammates. The local authorities had set up a command post in a cluster of prefabricated buildings. The commanding officer, a nervous Centauri named Colonel Vexon, briefed them on the situation. "The Separatists have been in control for 18 hours, he explained. "They have blocked all the main entrances and are monitoring communications. We have tried to negotiate, but they refuse to talk." "What about the hostages?" Captain Zisavik asked. "Still alive, as far as we know," the colonel replied. "But Commander Jackster has threatened to start executing them if we attempt a rescue." Katie studied the tactical displays showing the facility's exterior. The main entrances were heavily guarded, and the Separatists had set up defensive positions that would make any assault extremely costly. "Have you tried the maintenance access points?" she asked. Colonel Vexon looked confused. "Those tunnels are too small for military use. No one could fit through them." "I could," Katie said quietly. The colonel stared at her for a moment, then looked at Captain ZXTHAK. "You cannot be serious." "She is barely larger than the maintenance drones." "That is exactly the point," Katie replied. "I could get inside without being detected and report on enemy positions and hostage locations." Captain Eskothet was quiet for a long moment. The mission was too important to fail, and traditional approaches had already proven unsuccessful. Perhaps it was time to try something different. "Show us the maintenance access points," he ordered. Colonel Vexon led them to a rocky outcrop about half a kilometer from the facility. Hidden among the stones was a metal grate that covered a tunnel entrance. The opening was barely large enough for Katie to squeeze through. "This connects to the main ventilation system," the colonel explained. "But it is a maze down there, easy to get lost." Katie knelt down and peered into the dark tunnel. The passage was narrow and would require her to crawl, but it was definitely passable. She could see where it branched off into different directions, creating a network that could take her anywhere in the facility. "I can navigate it," she said with confidence. "How?" Tholmer asked. "You have no map, no guide." "You could crawl in circles for hours." Katie tapped her temple. "Humans are good at spatial reasoning. I studied the facility blueprints. I can find my way." Vilsec Escales shifted color again as he considered the plan. "It is risky, but it might be our best option. Intelligence gathering is crucial for any rescue attempt." "What if you encounter guards?" Quindle asked. "I will avoid them," Katie replied. "The whole point is to stay hidden." Captain Esksothik made his decision. "Very well. You will attempt reconnaissance through the maintenance tunnels, but you will report back every 15 minutes. If you miss a check-in, we abort the mission." Katie nodded and began preparing her equipment. She selected only the essentials: a small communications device, a compact scanner, and a tiny camera to record what she found. Everything else would just slow her down in the narrow tunnel's dot. As she prepared to enter the tunnel, her teammates gathered around her. They still looked worried, but there was something else in their expressions now. For the first time, they were seeing her as a real member of the team, not just a liability. "Be careful, little human," Thulmer said gruffly. "We will be waiting for your report." Katie smiled and squeezed into the tunnel entrance. The space was tight, but she fit comfortably. As she began to crawl forward into the darkness, she heard Captain Zixathic's voice behind her. "Stay safe, Katie Miller. We are counting on you." The tunnel was dark and cold, but Katie felt strangely at home in the confined space. Her small size, which everyone saw as a weakness, was finally becoming an advantage. She moved forward steadily, following the mental map she had created from the facility blueprints. Behind her, the team prepared for whatever she might find. They had given her a chance to prove herself, and she was determined not to let them down. The Separatists had no idea that their carefully planned defense was about to be infiltrated by someone they would never see coming. Katie crawled through the dark tunnel for what felt like hours. The metal walls pressed close around her, and her breath echoed softly in the confined space. But she moved with steady purpose, following the mental map she had created from the facility blueprints. Every few minutes, she whispered into her communication device, letting her team know she was still alive and moving forward. "Team 7, this is Katie. I am approaching the first junction. No contact so far." Captain ZXTAC's voice crackled back through the small speaker. "Understood? Continue with caution." The tunnel branched off in 3 directions. Katie consulted her mental map and chose the path that led toward the main facility levels. The passage sloped downward, taking her deeper into the mountain. She could hear the hum of machinery in the distance, and the air grew warmer as she moved closer to the active areas of the mining complex. After another 10 minutes of crawling, Katie reached a ventilation grate that looked down into a corridor. She pressed her eye to the metal slats and peered into the space below. 2 Torgan guards stood at the end of the hallway, their weapons held ready. They looked nervous and kept glancing at the shadows around them. Katie activated her small camera and recorded everything she saw: the guards' positions, their weapons, the layout of the corridor. She whispered into her communicator, describing what she had found. "I can see 2 guards in the main corridor on level 3. They appear to be standard security patrol, moving to the next observation point." She crawled past the grate and continued deeper into the facility. The tunnels were like a hidden highway that connected every part of the complex. Katie began to understand why the Separatists had been so successful in taking control. They had focused on the obvious entrances and main corridors, but they had no idea about the network of passages that ran behind the walls. The next grate showed her a larger chamber where several guards were gathered around a table. They were eating and talking, their weapons leaning against the wall nearby. Katie counted 6 fighters and noted their positions carefully. She also noticed something interesting. They looked tired and stressed. The confident rebels who had taken the facility were starting to show signs of strain. 6 guards in what appears to be a break room, she reported. They looked fatigued. Morale may be lower than expected. As Katie continued her reconnaissance, she began to notice other details that would have been invisible to a larger infiltrator. The guards were following predictable patrol patterns. They avoided certain areas that might be dangerous or unstable. Most importantly, they were not watching the ceiling or the small spaces between walls where someone her size might be hiding. She reached another observation point and saw something that made her heart race. A large chamber filled with civilian workers huddled together on the floor. The hostages looked scared but unharmed. 3 guards watched over them, but they seemed bored and inattentive. I have found the hostages, Katie whispered into her communicator. 30 civilians in the main chamber on level 5. 3 guards present. The civilians appear to be unharmed. This was the information her team needed most. But as Katie prepared to continue her survey, she heard footsteps in the corridor below. A guard was approaching, and he was looking up. At the ceiling with suspicion. Katie froze, controlling her breathing and remaining perfectly still. The guard stopped directly below her position and studied the ventilation grate with narrowed eyes. He had heard something, or maybe he had just noticed a shadow that seemed out of place. For several long seconds, the guard stared upward while Katie remained motionless. She could hear her own heartbeat, but she forced herself to stay calm. Moving now would mean discovery, and discovery would mean death. Finally, the guard shrugged and continued his patrol. Katie waited several more minutes before moving, making sure he was completely gone before she continued through the tunnels. "Close call," she whispered to her team. "But I am still undetected." As she crawled deeper into the facility, Katie began to understand the full scope of the Separatist operation. They had positioned guards at all the major intersections and were using the mining equipment to create barriers and defensive positions. But they had made one crucial mistake. They were thinking like conventional soldiers, not like someone who had grown up learning to hunt and hide. Katie found herself studying the guards not just as obstacles, but as prey. She noted which ones were alert and which ones were careless. She observed their habits, their routines, and their weaknesses. Without even realizing it, she was beginning to think like a predator. The next observation point showed her commander, Jaxter himself. The Separatist leader was a large Torgan with cybernetic implants that made him look even more intimidating. He was giving orders to his subordinates, his voice carrying clearly through the ventilation system. "The coalition forces are still outside," he was saying. "They do not have the courage to attack us directly. We hold all the advantages here." Katie recorded everything, including the commander's location and the number of guards around him. But she also noticed something else. Jaxter was confident, maybe overconfident. He believed his position was unassailable, and that confidence could be turned into a weakness. She continued her reconnaissance, mapping out the entire facility and documenting every guard position. The tunnels took her to places the Separatists had never thought to secure. She could see their entire operation from above, like a hawk studying prey from the sky. "Team 7, this is Katie. I have completed the full survey, sending you everything I have recorded." She transmitted the data back to her team, including videos, photographs, and detailed notes about guard positions and patrol patterns. Information would give them a complete picture of the enemy's strengths and weaknesses. Captain Extathic's voice came through the communicator. "Excellent work, Katie. Return to the extraction point immediately." But as Katie began to make her way back through the tunnels, she encountered an unexpected problem. A patrol of 3 guards was moving through a corridor she needed to cross. They were being more careful than the others, checking corners and looking for hidden threats. Katie watched from above as they approached her position. In a few seconds, they would be directly below her, and she would have to remain perfectly still until they passed. But then she noticed something that changed everything. One of the guards was carrying a device that looked like a scanner. He was sweeping it back and forth, searching for electronic signals. If he used it on the ventilation system, he might detect her communication equipment. Katie had to make a choice. She could try to hide and hope the scanner would not find her, or she could take action to prevent discovery. The safe choice was to wait and hope for the best. But Katie had not survived 2 years of training by playing it safe. She quietly removed a small object from her equipment kit, a distraction device that would create a noise in a different part of the facility. She activated it and sent it rolling down a different tunnel, where it would make a sound that would draw the guards away from her position. The device worked perfectly. The scanner-equipped guard heard the noise and led his team toward the distraction, leaving Katie's route clear. She waited until they were completely gone before moving, then continued her journey back to the extraction point. But as she crawled through the tunnels, Katie realized something had changed inside her. The nervous young recruit who had entered the facility was gone, replaced by someone who thought in terms of tactics and advantages. She had spent hours studying the enemy, learning their patterns, and finding their weaknesses. More importantly, she had discovered that her small size was not just useful for reconnaissance. It was a weapon that could be turned against enemies who expected their threats to be large and obvious. The Separatists had never even considered that someone like her might be watching them from the Yunf. Shadows. Katie reached the extraction point and squeezed out of the tunnel into the rocky outcrop where her team was waiting. They gathered around her eagerly, wanting to hear what she had learned. "The intelligence you gathered is incredible," Captain Zsafik said, reviewing her recordings. "We now have a complete picture of their defenses." "You did well, little human," Thulmer admitted grudgingly. "I did not think you would be able to navigate those tunnels successfully." But Katie barely heard their praise. She was still thinking about what she had seen in the facility. The guards, the hostages, the layout of the complex. Her mind was already working on solutions, on ways to turn the information she had gathered into action. "What is our next move?" she asked. Captain Zsafik looked at the tactical displays that showed the enemy positions Katie had mapped. "We will use your intelligence to plan a coordinated assault. The hostages can be rescued while the Separatists are distracted by our main attack." Katie nodded, but part of her was already thinking about other possibilities. She had seen the facility from the inside, had studied the enemy's habits and weaknesses. There might be other ways to accomplish their mission, ways that did not require a direct assault that could endanger the hostages. As the team prepared for the next phase of their operation, Katie checked her equipment and made sure everything was ready. She had proven herself as a scout, but she had a feeling that her real test was still to come. The Separatists thought they were. The team spent the next several hours planning their assault based on Katie's intelligence. Captain Zsafik spread out the tactical displays on a portable table while the others studied the detailed information she had gathered. Every guard position, every patrol route, every weakness in the Separatist defenses was now mapped out in perfect detail. "This is remarkable work," Quintal said, his crystalline form reflecting the light from the displays. "You have given us a complete picture of their entire operation." Katie stood with her teammates, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about the facility, about the guards she had watched, about the patterns she had observed. There was something nagging at her, something that did not fit with the plan they were developing. "The main assault will focus here," Captain Zsafik explained, pointing to the primary entrance. "While they are distracted by our attack, a smaller team will move through the secondary tunnels to reach the hostages." "What about the maintenance tunnels?" Katie asked. "We could use them to position team members throughout the facility." "Too risky," Thulmer replied. "You prove they can be navigated, but only someone your size could use them effectively. The rest of us would be trapped if something went wrong." Katie nodded, but she was not convinced. The maintenance tunnels were more than just a way to gather intelligence. They were a complete network that could allow a small, skilled operative to move anywhere in the facility without being detected. But her teammates were right about one thing. Only someone her size could use them effectively. As the planning continued, Katie excused herself and walked to the edge of the command post. She needed to think, to process what she had learned during her reconnaissance. The facility was like a puzzle, and she was starting to see patterns that others might miss. The Separatists were confident because they controlled the obvious approaches. They had positioned their guards to watch the main corridors and entrances. But they had no idea that someone could move through the walls themselves, appearing and disappearing like a ghost. Katie activated her personal communicator and reviewed the recordings she had made. She studied each guard, each patrol pattern, each routine that the Separatists followed. Slowly, a different kind of plan began to form in her mind. What if the main assault was not necessary? What if there was a way to neutralize the Separatists without endangering the hostages? It would require someone who could move unseen through the facility, someone who understood the enemy's weaknesses, someone who could strike from the shadows, someone exactly like her. Captain Zisafek called her. Back to the planning table. Katie, we need you to guide the rescue team through the maintenance tunnels to the hostage chamber. Your knowledge of the layout will be crucial. I have a different idea, Katie said quietly. The team looked at her with surprise. She had been so quiet during the planning that they had almost forgotten she was there. What kind of idea? Valsec asked, his scales shifting color. Katie took a deep breath. What she was about to suggest would sound crazy to them, but she had seen something during her reconnaissance that they had not. She had seen how the Separatists really worked, how they thought, how they could be defeated. I think I can handle this mission alone, she said. The silence that followed was deafening. Her teammates stared at her as if she had suggested flying to the moon without a spaceship. Absolutely not, Captain Zixathic said firmly. You are not trained for solo combat. Operations. I am not talking about combat, Katie replied. I am talking about something more subtle. She activated the tactical display and began pointing out specific details from her reconnaissance. Look at their patrol patterns, she said. The guards are following predictable routes. They check in with each other at regular intervals. They have established routines that they follow without thinking. What is your point? Tholmer asked. My point is that routines can be disrupted, Katie explained. If something happened to just one or two guards, the others would start to worry. They would begin to question their security, to look for threats they cannot see. Quintel's crystalline form shifted as he considered her words. You are talking about psychological warfare. Exactly, Katie said. The Separatists are confident because they think they control the situation. But confidence can become fear very quickly if that control is threatened. Captain Zisiathik shook his head. Even if that were true, you could not accomplish it alone. You would need to eliminate multiple guards without being detected, and you do not have the training for that kind of operation. Katie looked at her commanding officer with steady green eyes. Sir, with respect, you do not know what kind of training I have. There was something in her voice that made them all pause. The quiet, uncertain tone they had grown used to was gone, replaced by something colder and more confident. What do you mean? Valsec asked. Katie was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Humans are not like other species. We did not evolve to be the strongest or the fastest. We survived by being smart, patient, and adaptable. We learned to hunt creatures much larger than ourselves by working together and using our environment against them. You are talking about ancient history, Tholmer said dismissively. No, Katie replied. I'm talking about what we still are. When humans train for military operations, we do not just learn to fight, we learn to think like predators. She activated another section of the tactical display, showing the facility's life support systems, power grid, and communication networks. I spent hours in those tunnels, and I was not just watching the guards. I was studying the facility itself. I know how to disrupt their power, how to interfere with their communications, how to make them afraid of shadows. Captain ZXDEC looked at the display with new understanding. You are talking about sabotage. I am talking about hunting, Katie corrected. The Separatists think they are the predators, but they are wrong. They are prey, and they do not even know it yet. The team exchanged glances. They had seen Katie as a scout, a gatherer of information, but now she was talking about something entirely different. She was talking about becoming a weapon. Even if you could disrupt their operations, Quintal said carefully, you would still need to deal with Commander Jackster and his inner circle. They will not be frightened away by simple sabotage. Katie smiled, and there was something in that expression that made her teammates uncomfortable. Commander Jackster is overconfident. He believes his position is unassailable. That confidence will be his weakness. How? Captain Exothek asked. Because he will never see me coming, Katie replied simply. She began to outline her plan, using the facility schematics to show how she could move through the maintenance tunnels to reach key systems. She could disable the power grid section by section, creating confusion and fear among the guards. She could interfere with their communications, making it impossible for them to coordinate their defenses. Most importantly, she could eliminate key personnel without anyone knowing how or why they had disappeared. This is madness, Thilmer said when she finished. You are talking about infiltrating a hostile facility alone and taking on 40 armed fighters by yourself. I am not talking about taking them on, Katie corrected. I am talking about making them take each other on. Fear is a powerful weapon, especially when people do not understand what they are afraid of. Veilsek's forked tongue flicked out as he considered the plan. As a scout himself, he understood the value of stealth and misdirection. It could work, he admitted reluctantly. But the risks are enormous. What about the hostages? Captain Sksothek asked. If your plan goes wrong, they could be killed. If your plan goes wrong, they could be killed too, Katie pointed out. But my plan does not require a direct assault that could trigger a massacre. The captain studied the tactical displays for a long time, weighing the options. A conventional assault carried significant risks, both for the hostages and for his team. But sending Katie in alone seemed like sending her to certain death. You would be completely on your own, he said finally. No backup, no support, no way to extract you if things go wrong. I understand, Katie replied. If you are captured, we cannot help you. I will not be captured. There was such certainty in her voice that it made them all pause. The quiet young woman who had joined their unit was gone, replaced by someone who spoke with the confidence of a natural killer. Very well, Captain Sksothek said after a long moment. But you will maintain radio contact at all times. If we detect any sign that your plan is failing, we will launch the assault immediately. Katie nodded and began preparing her equipment. She selected only the most essential items: tools for sabotage, devices for disrupting communications, and her personal weapons. Everything else would just slow her down as she checked her gear. Her teammates watched her with a mixture of concern and fascination. They were beginning to understand that they had never really known Katie Miller at all. The small, quiet human had been hiding something much more dangerous beneath her innocent exterior. Be careful, little human, Thulmer said as she prepared to leave. I still think you are too small for this kind of work. Katie looked up at the massive warrior and smiled. That is exactly what Commander Jackster will think too. She made her way back to the tunnel entrance, but this time she was not going in as a scout. She was G. Katie moved through the maintenance tunnels like a shadow given form. This time, she was not just observing the facility and its occupants. She was hunting them. Her first target was the power distribution center on level 2. She had identified it during her reconnaissance as a critical weakness in the Separatist defenses. The facility's lighting, communications, and security systems all depended on the main power grid dot. She reached the access panel and carefully removed the cover. Inside, a maze of cables and circuit boards controlled the flow of electricity throughout the complex. Katie selected a specific circuit that controlled the lighting in the guard quarters and made a precise cut. The lights in that section went out immediately, dot through the ventilation system. She could hear confused voices as guards tried to figure out what had happened. They assumed it was a simple equipment failure and sent a maintenance team to investigate. Katie smiled to herself. As she moved to her next target, over the next hour, she systematically disabled different sections of the power grid. Each failure seemed random and unconnected, but together they created a growing sense of unease among the separatists. Equipment was malfunctioning, lights were flickering, and the guards were starting to look over their shoulders. Team 7. This is Katie, she whispered into her communicator. Phase 1 complete. Beginning Phase 2. Phase 2 involved the communication system. Katie made her way to the main relay station and carefully sabotaged several key components. She did not destroy the system entirely, but instead created intermittent failures that would make it unreliable at critical moments. As she worked, she could hear the frustration in the guards' voices as they tried to report the various malfunctions to their commanders. Their messages were being garbled or cut off entirely, making it impossible to maintain proper coordination. Something is wrong with the communications, she heard one guard say. I cannot reach Commander Jackster. The power systems are failing too, another replied. This place is falling apart. Katie moved to her next objective, the first guard. She had studied his patrol pattern during her reconnaissance and knew exactly when he would be alone and vulnerable. She waited in the darkness above a maintenance corridor, as patient as a spider in its web. The guard appeared right on schedule, walking his route with the bored confidence of someone who had done the same thing dozens of times. He never looked up, never considered that danger might come from above. Katie dropped silently behind him and struck with surgical precision. The guard collapsed without making a sound. Katie dragged his unconscious body into a maintenance closet and took his weapon and communication device. Then she disappeared back into the tunnels, leaving no trace of what had happened. When the guard failed to report in, his partner came looking for him. But all he found was an empty corridor and a growing sense of dread. The guard's weapon was missing, his communicator was gone, and there was no sign of a struggle. Base, this is Patrol 7, the remaining guard said into his radio. Jensen is missing. I repeat, Jensen is missing. But the communication system had been sabotaged, and his message was lost in static. The guard found himself alone in the dark corridor, wondering what had happened to his partner, and whether it might happen to him too. Katie struck again 20 minutes later. Another guard, another silent takedown, another disappearance that left the separatists more confused and frightened. She was picking them off, one by one, using their own patrol patterns against Vendat. By the time she had eliminated her fourth target, panic was beginning to spread through the facility. The guards were no longer following their assigned routes. They were grouping together for safety, abandoning their posts to stay with their comrades. Team 7, this is Katie, she reported. The enemy is starting to break down. They are abandoning their defensive positions. Captain Isafek's voice crackled back through the communicator. Understood. How many hostiles have you neutralized? 4. Down approximately 40 remaining, Katie replied. But their morale is collapsing. They are more afraid of each other than they are of us. She was right. The separatists were beginning to turn on each other, suspecting betrayal and sabotage from within their own ranks. Some guards accused others of being coalition spies. Others believed that the facility itself was haunted by the ghosts of dead. Miners, Commander Jackster tried to restore order, but his communication system was unreliable and his power grid was failing. He could not coordinate his defenses effectively, and his guards were becoming increasingly unreliable. All units, Maintain your positions. He ordered over the failing radio system. We are dealing with equipment failures, nothing more. But his words rang hollow. Too many things were going wrong at once for it to be simple equipment failure. Something was hunting them in the darkness, picking them off one by one, and no one knew what it was. Katie continued her systematic elimination of key targets. She focused on the guards who seemed most confident, the ones who other separatists looked to for leadership. Each disappearance weakened the group's cohesion and spread fear through their ranks. She also began psychological warfare in earnest. Using the facility's intercom system, she played recordings of the guards she had eliminated, their voices echoing through the corridors like ghostly warnings. She manipulated the lighting to create moving shadows that made the remaining guards jump at their own reflections. "What is happening to us?" one guard whispered to his companion. "People are disappearing, the systems are failing, and no one knows why." "Maybe the Coalition has some kind of new weapon," the other replied. "Something we have never seen before." They were closer to the truth than they realized. Humans were indeed a new kind of weapon, one that the galaxy was not prepared for. Katie represented the ultimate evolution of Earth's most dangerous predator, a creature that could think, plan, and adapt faster than its prey could react. As the night wore on, the number of functional guards continued to decrease. Katie had eliminated 12 of them without firing a single shot or triggering any alarms. The remaining separatists were huddled together in small groups, afraid to venture out alone. "Team 7, this is Katie," she reported. "I am ready for a final phase." The final phase involved Commander Jackster himself. Katie had been saving him for last, waiting until his forces were weakened and demoralized. Now it was time to end the siege once and for all. She made her way through the tunnels to the command center where Jackster had established his headquarters. The commander was surrounded by his remaining guards, but they were nervous and jumpy. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound might be the approach of death. Katie studied the scene from above, planning her approach carefully. Jackster was a dangerous opponent, but he was also frightened and confused. His confidence had been shattered by the night's events, and he was no longer thinking clearly. She dropped through a ceiling panel directly into the command center, landing silently behind the group of guards. For a moment, no one noticed her presence. She was so small and quiet that she might have been invisible. Then one of the guards turned around and saw her. His eyes widened in shock and fear as he tried to understand what he was looking at. A tiny human female, covered in shadows and armed with weapons that seemed too large for her frame. "What are you?" The guard whispered. Katie looked up at him with cold green eyes that reflected no mercy or hesitation. "I am human," she said simply. Words sent a chill through the room. Suddenly, all the strange events of the night made sense. The disappearances, the sabotage, the systematic destruction of their defenses. It had all been the work of this small, seemingly harmless creature. Commander Jackster raised his weapon, but Katie was already moving. She flowed between the guards, like water, striking with precision and deadly efficiency. Her movements were too fast and too unpredictable for the larger, slower separatists to follow. Within seconds, it was over. Commander Jackster found himself alone with the small human, who had destroyed his entire operation. His weapon was gone, his guards were down, and he was face to face with something that defied everything he thought he knew about combat. "The hostages will be released immediately," Katie said in a voice that carried absolute authority despite its quiet tone. Jackster looked into her eyes and saw death waiting patiently for his answer. He activated his communicator with shaking hands and gave the order to release the civilian workers. "Team 7, this is Katie," she reported calmly. "Mission accomplished. The facility is secure, and the hostages are free." Captain Xathic's voice came back filled with amazement. Confirmed. We can see the hostages emerging from the main entrance. How did you... I will explain later, Katie interrupted. Right now, I need a pickup. As she waited for her team to arrive, Katie looked around. The command center at the defeated separatists. They stared at her with a mixture of fear and awe, unable to comprehend how someone so small had accomplished what an entire army could not. When her teammates finally reached the facility, they found Katie sitting quietly in the command center, her weapons secured and her equipment neatly organized. She looked exactly like the quiet young woman who had joined their unit, but they would never see her the same way again. How? Was all Fulmer could manage to say. Katie stood up and shouldered her pack. I told you. Humans are good at hunt.